So, before Oda Nobunaga became one of the most powerful figures in all of Japanese history, before the battles, before the castles, before everything, most of the people around him genuinely thought he was a disaster. He wandered the streets in rough, untied clothing. He ate in public, like a commoner. He ignored the rules of formal behavior that every lord's son was supposed to follow. And he did all of this so consistently, so visibly, that people gave him a nickname. They called him Owari no Otsuke, the Fool of Owari. And here's what I find fascinating about that. Because when his father died suddenly, and Nobunaga had to prove he could actually lead, almost nobody believed he could. This is the story of how he proved them wrong. Alright, a little context first, because it really does make the story better. Nobunaga was born in 1534 in Owari Province, which is roughly where the city of Nagoya is today. His father was Oda Nobuhide, the head of the Oda clan, and a man people called the Tiger of Owari. Nobuhide was sharp, ambitious, and tough enough to hold his own against two powerful neighbors at the same time, the Imagawa clan to the east and the Saito clan to the north. So Nobunaga grew up in a clan that was constantly under pressure. There was no room for weakness, and yet, from his early teens, Nobunaga seemed to be doing everything wrong. He wore his sleeves cut off. He ate food while walking, something no lord's son was supposed to do. He spent time wrestling with commoners, practicing archery, and riding horses. He was loud, unpredictable, and had zero interest in the formal behavior expected of someone who would one day lead the clan. His tutors were embarrassed, the senior retainers shook their heads, and his younger brother, Nobuyuki, calm, polite, well-dressed, looked like exactly the kind of person a powerful clan should have as its next leader. So, when 1551 arrived and everything changed, the reaction from the people around Nobunaga was pretty much, well, this is going to go badly. In the spring of 1551, Oda Nobuhide died unexpectedly at around 40 years old, and what happened next says a lot about where Nobunaga stood at that moment. At the funeral, Nobunaga showed up late. He was dressed carelessly, and according to accounts from the time, he threw ceremonial incense at the altar, which was, to put it gently, not how funerals worked. The reaction in the room was exactly what you'd expect. Senior retainers who had served his father for years looked at the scene and thought, "This is the person who's supposed to lead us?" And so support began to shift. Most of the Oda retainers started moving toward Nobuyuki, the calm, well-mannered younger brother. Even Nobunaga's own mother favored him. And then something happened that Nobunaga clearly felt deeply. One of the few retainers who had genuinely believed in Nobunaga, a senior advisor named Hirate Masahide, who had helped raise him, performed seppuku, a ritual death. The historical record doesn't state the exact reason, but many accounts interpret it as an act of shame, a protest, a last message. Nobunaga later built a temple in Masahide's honor. Whatever people thought of him, that loss clearly stayed with him. But despite everything, the doubts, the empty room at the funeral, the retainers walking away, Nobunaga was still the legitimate heir. His father had formally designated him as the next head of the Oda clan, and in the feudal world of Sengoku Japan, that still meant something. He also wasn't completely without support. Nagoya Castle had been his since he was 8 years old. His father had given it to him, and the retainers attached to that castle had served under him for years. They hadn't left. So, Nobunaga moved quickly. Before the opposition could fully organize, he gathered the men who were still with him, the ones attached to Nagoya, the ones who had chosen to stay, and assembled a force of roughly 1,000 men. It wasn't a large army, but it was enough to make one thing clear. He was still standing, and he wasn't going anywhere. The situation was still getting worse on multiple fronts. An uncle named Oda Nobutomo tried to seize control of the province by using a puppet governor. Other retainers who had sworn loyalty to Nobuhide started making their own calculations. Nobunaga dealt with all of it, one problem at a time, steadily, carefully, without the grand declarations anyone might have expected. Then in 1556, the challenge he had been waiting for finally came. Nobuyuki, backed by a group of senior retainers, formally rebelled against him. Nobunaga defeated them at the Battle of Ino, and what he did next was, honestly, unexpected. He chose to pardon his brother. Nobuyuki was allowed to live, But a year later, word reached Nobunaga that his brother was planning to rebel again. So this time, Nobunaga came up with a different approach. He pretended to be seriously ill, using that as a reason to call his brother close. When Nobuyuki arrived, Nobunaga had him killed. By 1559, after 7 years of maneuvering, fighting, and outlasting everyone who had bet against him, Nobunaga had done it. Owari Province was unified. The clan that had been falling apart since his father's death was finally fully his. The Fool of Owari had proven every single person wrong. So what does this part of Nobunaga's story actually tell us? I think it tells us something about the gap between how people appear and what they're actually capable of. Everyone who looked at young Nobunaga saw the rough clothes, the informal behavior, the disrespect for tradition, and they all reached the same conclusion: this person is not serious. But maybe what looked like someone with no intention of leading turned out to be the opposite, because when the moment came, when everything around him was falling apart, he didn't freeze, he moved. And 7 years later, through all the chaos, the betrayals, and the people who had written him off, he was still standing, still leading. The Fool of Owari was now the undisputed head of the Oda clan. The 7 years between his father's death and the unification of Owari were not glamorous. They were political, messy, and often brutal. But at the end of them, Nobunaga had done something his own father, the Tiger of Owari, had never quite managed. He had truly held the province together, and with Owari secured, he could finally start thinking bigger. But thinking bigger meant a reckoning was coming, because to the east, Imagawa Yoshimoto had not stopped watching. In fact, by 1560, he was done watching. Yoshimoto assembled one of the largest armies seen in that part of Japan and marched toward Owari, toward Nobunaga, by every measure that existed at the time. This should have been the end of Nobunaga's story, but it wasn't. What happened next, at a place called Okehazama, is one of the most remarkable moments in all of Sengoku history. That's the next story. Hey, I'm Ren, and this was the video about Nobunaga Oda when he was still young. If you made it this far, thank you. It genuinely means a lot. I hope this video was worth your time. See you in the next one.